And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, a special hello goes out to the Director of Media for the Boston Bruins alumni, Mr. Mark Boland. I see you, Marky.
Welcome to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the home of behind-the-scenes interviews, stories, and memories that celebrate the heritage of the great game of hockey. The Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast is hosted by Mark Willand.
Buffalo going in, a shot. A shorthanded goal by Don Luce. Well, this is what Luce...
Episode 29 of the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast features Don Luce, a Buffalo Sabres Hall of Famer who was one of the NHL's premier two-way players in the 1970s. Luce teamed with wingers Craig Ramsay and Danny Gare to form one of hockey's most potent lines. In all, Luce played 894 NHL games, scoring 225 goals, adding 329 assists for 554 points. His best statistical season was 74-75 with the Sabres when he set career highs in goals with 33, points 76, shorthanded goals with 8, a plus-minus rating of plus 61. Of course, that was the year the Sabres went to the Stanley Cup Finals before losing to the Philadelphia Flyers. At season's end, Luce was awarded with the Masterton Trophy for perseverance to hockey. Post-career, Luce enjoyed a great success in player development with the Sabres and the Flyers. In this interview, Don tells hilarious stories about his days with the Rangers, Red Wings and Sabres, and also discusses the heartbreaking trade from Buffalo to LA, and the tough adjustment he had in the early days of retirement. Don also discusses his exciting new business, which helps athletes of all ages maximize their mental preparation for athletic competition. Now, let's talk classic hockey with Don Luce. Well, we're back on the show with a guy who used to be best known as one of the top two-way players in all of hockey in the 70s and early 80s, but perhaps now is best known as the grandfather of Griffin Luce of the University of Michigan hockey team. Mr. Don Luce. Don, thanks so much for being here tonight.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure.
We really appreciate that, and it must be a lot of fun and very exciting. I mean, your son Scott, obviously very successful in hockey, helping to build a Las Vegas Golden Knights hockey club, and his son Griffin. It must be a lot of fun to be able to watch him play big time college hockey.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's exciting. It's at times very nerve-wracking.
Right.
But it's great to be able to go to the games and see him develop and become a very good player.
When you were young, you played Junior B, and I believe it's a team called St. Mary's. When did the New York Rangers scouts first notice you? When did you first have contact with them and think you may have an opportunity to play professionally someday?
Really, it happened after I played my first year in St. Mary's. That summer, I was invited to Kitchener Rangers training camp,
mm-hmm.
and also I was invited to the Peterborough Peach training camp. And so I decided on the Kitchener team, and I went to camp, and I made the team, but it was like major, it's major junior. And I didn't think that, because of the situation, I just didn't feel right about getting a lot of ice time that year.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back to St. Mary's to play another year of Junior B. And then the next year, they had a OHA at the time draft, and they picked me because they had the first pick, so
mm-hmm.
they picked me, and that's when I became Kitchener Rangers. And that same year, that was the year that most of the junior teams were owned by NHL teams,
right?
And that was the same year that they had to divest themselves of the junior teams. So but I was already, like, if I had have gone to the year before, I would have become Ranger property automatically.
Mm-hmm.
but because I went back and played junior B, they had to first draft me to the Kitchener Rangers, and then the next year they drafted me in the NHL draft.
So the Cat had his eyes on you for a while, Emil Francis.
Yes. I found out later that they'd been scouting me in St. Mary's and everything else. So Lou Passador and Steve Berkosich.
I was curious, when you go to the New York Rangers training camp, this is a team that has no shortage of good centers and up-and-coming centers. They've got Jean Rattel, Walkachuk, you've got Orlin Kurtenbach, Whitey Whiting, others. So what's it like in your first? I'm assuming the camp was up in Kitchener.
You got it.
So what's that like now? You got these Vic Hadfield, Rod Gilbert. It's got to be an incredible experience for a young kid.
Oh, absolutely. It's just it's surreal. It's like, is this really happening? And because there's guys you watch on TV, and all of a sudden you're on the same ice with them, and even when you play an exhibition game, you're playing against people that you've watched for years on TV, and all of a sudden you're in the mix with them and playing with them. So it's an amazing experience. It's hard to explain how it's so exciting that you're almost numb to it, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just it's just such a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it's got to be incredible. It's almost, I explained this to my son one time, it's almost like if you could jump into your video game you're playing and all of a sudden find yourself on the ice with all these heroes and players that you watch. I've often thought about that myself, how if I could have some magic formula or something where I could just for one time just feel what it was like stepping on the ice with guys like that and playing. It had to be incredible. So you end up, as with a lot of the young Rangers, you go to Omaha, Nebraska, to playing minor league hockey and getting seasoned. What was it like? I mean, I've never really considered this, but what was it like playing professional hockey in Nebraska?
It was great. Like we sold out every game, I think, and it was great following. And the team we lost out the first round of the playoffs the first year, and then we won the championship the second year. But it was great because back then it was like they always had some older veterans on the team, so they helped because they had the American League and the Central League at the time,
mm-hmm.
and all the young prospects went to the Central League. The older guys that were basically either at the end of their career or weren't on the cusp of making it, went to the American League. So the whole league was made up of young guys, and basically it was like you play against guys that you played junior against because they had turned pro too.
Right.
And so it was good. Like the city itself was wonderful. They loved their hockey. We, back then we all lived in the same complex basically, and so the tightness of the team was tremendous, and they played with a lot of great players there. I mean, it was some really good players. So it was. It's always fun when you're winning.
Oh, absolutely. And, the NHL had just expanded a couple years earlier to 12 teams, but still only 12 teams. So a lot of talent in the minor leagues, and as you said, enough to fill two teams, a few of the New York Rangers. And eventually you get the call in 69-70, the Rangers are starting to hit their stride as a premier NHL franchise. And you have a short stay with them in 69-70. One guy that was there, I think he was there when you were there, and you certainly played with him in Buffalo. And I think of this because I just saw a picture of a young Tim Horton the other day, and it was a picture of him as a young guy, and he didn't have his jersey on. I think he was one of the, he was so, I could never realize how big and strong and muscular the guy was until I saw this picture. I didn't know him personally, obviously, but What type of guy was Tim? What type of relationship? And what was it like? Because he was older at that point, but still a very much of a force on defense.
Well, like that's the funny thing. When I got called up, Tim had just been traded there, and so he was living in the Penn Garden Hotel, the street from Madison Square Gardens. And so when I got called up, that's where I stayed. And I was there, I don't know, 2 weeks or so. Emil said that I was staying up. And he said, why don't you, excuse me, bring up your wife and your daughter. And so they came up and stayed for 2 weeks. But in that interim, Tim had his family, and he had the penthouse in the Penn Garden. And, you know, we were kids, and he would always invite us up for dinner and stuff. And one of the lessons, it's funny because my wife said to him one time, she said, Mr. Horton, can I have your autograph? And he started laughing. He says, you don't call me Mr. Horton, you call me Tim. Your husband plays with me. He's a teammate. I'm not your grandfather. You know, I'm one of the guys, sort of thing, you know. And so it was a great relationship. And what came of it, because Tim had a habit of, when you went on the road, if he wanted to go to dinner with you, he'd wait for you in the lobby. And he'd put his arm around you. And you referenced how strong he was. Well, once that arm was around you, you had no choice. But what he did was, because he found out that I had a sweet tooth, and so in a lot of the cities, he would come down and wait for me, and we'd go out, but it wouldn't be to dinner. We'd go. He had found a list of donut shops, and we'd go to them, and he would, you know, ask me to pick out some donuts to eat, and then give him, you know, do you like that one or not? And then he would go and ask the guy how he made them, and so we did that for you know, just about the rest of that year. And so I did a lot of donut tasting, and and so our families became close because Diane stayed with Lori and the kids at the Penn Garden, and so they became very close, and we eventually, Diane had to, there was an airplane strike. It was funny because there was an airplane strike, and so Diane couldn't go back to Omaha, and Emil would not let her take the train or the bus. So Lori was going back to Toronto, so she took Scott and Diane back to Toronto with her, and they stayed there for a week because we had to we played at Toronto and Detroit on the week they were in Toronto. So they became very close, and like, I can't say enough about Tim because, you know, he was just such a great guy, and like you say, he wasn't a big man, but he was 110% muscle.
Yeah.
And but he was such a good guy. He had a good sense of humor, and we got along really, really well, and just a wonderful, wonderful man. Just a great, great man. Absolutely.
It's too bad that all that donut tasting you did with Tim, you didn't say, hey, someday if you decide to make a business of this, don't forget about me here.
Exactly.
Who knows? But do you recall your first game as a New York Ranger putting on that blue shirt, and do you recall your first NHL goal?
Yes, I do. I remember the first game. We played the Pittsburgh. Played the Penguins in Madison Square Gardens. And I'll never forget it because it ended up a 0-0 tie. And I think I set a personal record for hits. And it was like, I'm here. What am I gonna do? It's hard to believe you're there. Like, there's one thing training camp, but then when you step on the rink for an official game in an NHL building, there's something that's just mind-boggling. It's just like you can't believe you're there, and then you get into the game, and then you kind of, what I felt was that I kind of just forgot that it was the National Hockey League, and just tried to play the way I play, and things went pretty well.
Now, when did you score that first goal?
Well, it was against Minnesota, and when I tell some of the players in management, they say, "Well, who you scored a goal against?" And I tell them it was Gump Worsley.
Not bad, starting out with a Hall of Famer.
Yep, exactly. And what it was actually Bobby Nevin was my right winger, and I think Teddy Irvin was my left winger. And again, it was at Madison Square Gardens, and we got the puck in their zone, and Nevy was so good with the puck and stuff, and he wrangled around to get in a good shooting position, and he shot the puck, and I deflected it in the net.
Well, you can always say that you took the puck behind the goal, skated through four guys, went top shelf, 200 feet,
exactly.
And that's maybe that's how we'll remember it. But it had to be great. A couple of good line mates too. Actually, Ted Irvin's going to be a guest on our show upcoming. But after a lengthy stay in the Ranger organization, through the minors and through juniors and what have you, get traded to the Detroit Red Wings, who were in a bit of disarray at that time, but still had some of hockey's greatest all-time legends, Alex Delvecchio, Frank Milhovlich, and of course Gordie Howe. And so my question for you is, Don, as a teammate or perhaps even as an opponent before that, do you have a Gordie Howe story?
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, it was we played Detroit. That I got traded in November, I believe, and we played Detroit that fall in an exhibition game in Kitchener. And Vic Hadfield was my left winger at the time, and Gordie was my idol. And so we're playing, and I got a chance to hit Gordie. It's funny you say hit, because I had a good chance to hit him, and I hit him, and I knocked him down. And I was very, very proud of myself. And so it just so happened that the play ended or something. But we go back to the bench, and Vic Hadfield said to me, he said, "Son, forget about the puck the rest of this game." He said, "He's coming after you. So beware." And sure enough, 5 times in that game he tried to get me. But because of Vic, he never got me.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't play Detroit again, but then I got traded there. So I go there, and the first practice, we're practicing, and you know how you get in a line, you skate down, take a shot in the net, then go back and get in the other line on the other side, right? So I'm not thinking anything. I go down and take my shot at the goalie, and skate into the corner, and I look up, and he's got a stick right in the middle of my forehead. and he said to me, he says, "You're the only player I never got back."
That's funny. That was maybe it's the best thing for your career that you did get traded to Detroit with that in mind. Because I'm not exaggerating. I mean, you know this, you played, but everybody I talked to, "Oh, this guy right here, that was Gordie," or "Broke my jaw, that was Gordie," and so you were able to dodge thanks to number 11 Vic Hadfield.
Yep, exactly.
The same
great.
fate.
And like he's the best player that ever played. I've never met an athlete like him.
Once in a lifetime athlete, to be sure.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. He was on my line, and his last goal in Detroit I assisted on.
Wow, I did not know that.
And he gave me a picture signed, "Thanks for all the help," on, I think it was something like 806 or something like that.
No, that's great.
You know?
That's a good piece. I did not know that.
Yeah.
But eventually, your life and your career take a very positive turn, and the Red Wings at that time, as I said, there's a lot of disarray, a lot of change, and they were going into a real dry spell. But the expansion of Buffalo Sabres had a decent first year, and in their second year, you get traded there, playing for Punch Imlach. And the seeds are sown. I mean, I have to say, you've been in scouting and personnel for a long time, but the job that Punch Imlach did in the early days of the Buffalo Sabres in acquiring talent either through trades or the draft was pretty impressive, and you were part of that as well as a player. What was your evaluation now, looking back at the job that Punch did in those early days of the Buffalo Sabres?
Oh, I think it was phenomenal. Like, he built the team. He had a good eye for talent, and he had, John Anderson was his right-hand man. And, I mean, the spin of the wheel where he got Perreault in the first pick was a huge coup.
True. And,
from then on, he put pieces together. He got René Robert from Pittsburgh, and he had a great mind for putting a team together and getting the right pieces. And I became very, very friendly with Punch, because at that time I didn't have an agent, and as you probably know, Punch wasn't thrilled with agents.
Right.
And so what would happen is, when my contract was up, he would call me up on a Friday and say, "What are you doing Monday?" And I said, "Oh, I'm not doing anything." He says, "Well, come down to the office. Be there at 10 o'clock. So I go down to the office at 10 o'clock on Monday, and, we'd sit down, and, I'd tell him what I wanted, and he'd say, "Well, that's too much. That's ridiculous." And then he'd say, "I can trade you." And I said, "Well, if you think the guy's better," I said, "why don't you trade me then, if you think it's a better deal?" And that would be about an hour and a half. And after that, for the next 2.5 to 3 hours, we just talk hockey.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about the league, about players, about everything. And so I did. He did that for like 2 weeks straight. Every day I go down there, and contract was even put on the back shelf. We just talked hockey.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to know him, and a great guy, he loved his players. People, he had the persona of being this hard-ass guy and stuff.
Yeah.
But once you showed him that you were the player he thought you were, and you did your job, he loved you. Like, he would take care of you. Like, at the end of my career, he was in Toronto, and I asked to be traded back east because my mother was dying of cancer, and it was near the end of my career, and he traded for me, because he knew he wanted to be known as a hard ass and stuff. But once you really got to know the guy, he was, he loved his players. If you worked for him and did your job, you were one of his guys.
Well, it's interesting. As a fan, as you referenced, I always looked at him as kind of a hard ass. I did, just as a kid, I didn't know, but that's good perspective of Punch. Certainly, as I said, he did a terrific job, which kind of culminates from you guys and you personally, and the team is just steadily getting better year after year. Of course, one big part of that is the French connection. You had a front seat to all that. Tell me a little bit about what it was like watching those guys once René Robert comes on the scene, Perreault and Martin maturing. What was it like watching them fly up and down the ice?
Oh, it was great. Perreault made the end-to-end rushes, and Rico could really shoot the puck and competed like crazy. And René was kind of the mix between the two, talented, could really handle the puck, make plays, and that line, it clicked. They had they had good chemistry, and everything was, easy for them to fall into sync. They thought the same game. They're very offensive, and they all three of them had the tools to play that type of game. And and I think really Perreault was like, when he started skating, and he was such a great effortless skater that you could really underestimate his speed, and he could handle the puck so well, and plus he was such a great individual. Like he's a superstar, and he's basically a regular guy.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't want to be this, it's all about me, it's stuff like that. He was just a great teammate, which is, some of the players of that era maybe weren't that like that, but because the way he was, it really helped our team that, hey, yeah, he could score points and stuff, but he was just part of the team. That's the way he thought about it, and which really helped. We had such great chemistry. Like it was by far the best team I ever played on. That everybody got along, and even though they're from, there were some single guys and different backgrounds and stuff, but everybody got along, and that was really helped us become the team we were. That put a group of guys together that really bonded and really played for each other.
Absolutely. It's a real credit to Punch and the players, and you can see that now at the Sabres alumni. You can see the closeness of the guys all these years later, which reminded me of something else. You're playing in the Odd. It's a great building for hockey, and the fans have relatively close access to the players, as they did in a lot of those old buildings. The players, the fans seem to bond with the team right away, and talk a little bit about the Sabres fans of that era.
Well, it was crazy. It was absolutely, because of that building. After every game, you had to walk through the fans to get out of the building, and we like I even tell the fans here when I masked that they became like the seventh player, because they appreciated what we were trying to do, and they showed us every time, we did something great. They were just, it was just awesome, and the closeness of them, even in the stands, as compared to nowadays, was ridiculous. Like it was, you could reach out and touch them.
Yeah.
It was just, it was, and that really, really helped us bond as a team. And you're playing for your teammates and everything else, but we felt that we were playing for our fans. Like really felt it, because it was like, I don't know how to describe it. Like it was just this bond that very rarely happens.
Right.
And you couldn't go anywhere. I remember I went Christmas shopping one time, and we walked into the mall. I started signing autographs. My wife went shopping for 3 hours and came back, and I was still signing and talking hockey, and that was the way it was. It was just like I don't know if it can be replicated. It was so close, and we felt they were part of us, and I think they felt we were part of them.
Absolutely. You certainly got that sense then and now, even today. And as I said, you are steadily progressing in your talent and your skill and your production. So are the Sabres. And in 1974, you add some young talent: Peter McNabb, Lee Fogelin, and right wing Danny Gare. 1974-75, you have one of the most underrated seasons probably ever. It was an unbelievable year for you. You had 33 goals, plus 61, 8 shorthanded goals, and you win the Masterton Trophy. I guess I'm curious. First of all, obviously Craig, Ramsay, and you are always associated together. You think of one, you think of the other. But when did Danny Gare become a part of that duo becoming, and you guys became a line?
Well, it started out at training camp. Floyd put Danny with us right away, and it clicked. It was just, I think part is that we knew that just watching Danny in training camp and stuff that, he was a shooter. He could shoot the puck. Mm-hmm. Really, really shoot the puck. He had a great release, and he worked hard. And, we figured that, him being our line, we knew that we could utilize him. He's going to be a guy that's going to, he's a guy that you want to play with because he's going to work hard all the time. Mm-hmm. And he had the asset of the great shot and its competitive nature. It was just it seemed like a natural fit for us. And once we started playing his line, it got even better because we just clicked. And, I think it helped that Craig and I had played together for a little while previous to that. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think it was a rare thing that it just, the right move at the right time. I think they could have started him on another line or whatever, but for whatever reason they put him with us because he probably wasn't that good defensively. Mm-hmm. And that Craig and I were, a little more defensive minded at times, and they thought that this would balance out. If there was a learning curve for Danny, it would be defensively, and that we would help him develop that curve a little quicker.
Well, it certainly was a rarity in hockey at that time because the Sabres essentially had two number one quality lines, a French Connection and your trio. So you're playing against a lot of the top lines in the National Hockey League at the time: Bobby Clark, Barber and Leach, Esposito, Cashman, Hodge, Rattel, the gag line. Of all the lines that you faced, or all the players that you faced, what was the toughest group for you to, from a defensive standpoint? That's the thing that you can't forget. Obviously, fans can't forget is while you were still scoring, you're also providing great defensive play. And I was just curious, who's the toughest line to face in the National Hockey League?
At that time, I don't know, different styles. Like the gag line in New York was like a great line. Like Jean Rattel was such an underrated player in my mind. Very, very hard to play against. Also the Esposito line, very hard to play against. I don't know if I could pick out one that's harder than the other. Like they're for different reasons they are hard.
Right.
And so I don't know. I don't know if I could really pick one over the other. They're just they're all, those lines especially, were just basically the same, different style of play, but still they're very tough to play against. And my philosophy all along was that our best defense is to play in the other team's end.
Right.
And we kind of, that's the style we developed. The fact that, back then, offensive lines weren't too interested in back checking.
Right. You're right.
And so we realized this, that if we get a turnover and stuff, we wanted to go for scoring. Mm-hmm. Because we knew that we had a little more time to make a play in the other team's end, because these guys, and that I'm saying that all the offensive lines are basically a little lax in their defensive commitment at that time.
Yeah,
and so
right.
I give you a little bit more time to play in their end, and when you're playing in their end, they're not scoring and stuff. So it was good that way, but once you got in your end, then it was a different game because you had to play you had to be smart. You had to be intelligent to see and try and take away their strengths, and because they are all, they were very skilled. The Gag line was probably more skilled than the Esposito line.
Mm-hmm.
Esposito's line was more physical and were stronger in the corner. So it's you had to adjust pretty quickly. But they're all tough lines to play against. All very good players.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's again 1975, and despite being a team that was only a few years in existence, the Sabres are in the Stanley Cup Finals against defending Stanley Cup champion Philadelphia Flyers. Now, you've probably been asked about the Fog game 1,000 times, but I was curious. When I looked at that series, I think the talent levels on both teams were pretty similar. But I think at that time, Bernie Parent was at his peak. And was the year before, as a Bruins fan, you saw the Bruins lose in 6, and Bernie Parent was certainly the difference in that series, I thought. And of course, they had a great all-around team, and they were tough and hard-working. Yeah. But how did you see that series from your standpoint of the Buffalo Sabres?
Well, I really see the same thing. I think that I think if it wasn't for Bernie Parent, we win that, and because we had a very good team, and I think we matched up good, but we just couldn't beat Bernie. I remember actually the 5th game in Philadelphia. No, 5th game. Yeah, 5th game, and I remember this clear as day. For the first 10 minutes in that game in Philadelphia, they never had a shot on net.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave Schultz, going down the left wing, throws a pass cross ice in our end, and it hits Jerry Korab's skate and goes in the net.
Right.
They haven't had a shot on net yet, and they're up 1-0. And we ended up losing that game 5-1. But, for the first 10 minutes of that game, we were dominant. And we just couldn't beat Bernie. It's funny because I worked for Philadelphia after.
Right.
And they had a reunion of that team. Of course, they had to take a picture, right? So I'm in management. So I got to stand on the bench with all these guys in front of me, and they're asking me, what are you doing here? Didn't you lose that series? So it was a classic.
Absolutely. Well, one thing I thought as you go into the next season, one thing I thought, you added a lot of talent. You guys are playing great. I thought the loss of Rick Dudley to the WHA was harmful to the team. He had an excellent season in 74-75, provided a lot of toughness. And speaking of the WHA, obviously changed the economics around for yourself and your teammates. Did you ever have an opportunity to jump leagues? Was that ever a discussion?
Oh yeah, I had a 5-year contract with I think it was the Chicago Cougars that I could have left, but I didn't.
Smart.
Yeah, and I agree with you about Dudley. Yes, I agree that Dud was more valuable to the team than I think management thought, and I think it was a big loss. I don't know what it was, whether it was money. I believe it was probably a contract issue, but I think it did hurt our team for a while.
Especially in that era where goon hockey was starting to take shape, and the Sabres did not have goons. All you guys could play, but he was one guy who could mix it up
and play.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, the year before, Dudley was our right winger for a while. Before 74-75. So yeah, no, he was a loss. He definitely hurt our team toughness.
I know it's probably a a bad memory, but I have to ask you about it. Later in your Sabres career, I think it's 78 or 9 or whatever, you have a mishap on the ice that involves, I'm going to assume accidentally, Steve Durbano, and you get just a scary, nasty gash near your eye. Do you recall the circumstances of that injury, and were you fearful at that moment that you may have a permanent eye injury?
Well, I remember it exactly. We were playing, and Rick Sealing was carrying the puck, and I was coming up behind him, and Durbano hip checked him, and his skate came across just under my right eye and hit my nose and put my nose under my left eye.
Brother.
And it put a hole in my nose, and so I was bleeding, but it was coming out like that hole.
Oh, brother.
And actually, I think Derek Smith came over and looked at it, and he told everybody that I'd lost my eye because all the blood had covered everything up, and all you could see was the hole.
Mm-hmm.
And stuff. And I remember that. It was funny because they brought a stretcher out, and I don't know if you probably were at the audit at some point, but they have where the Zamboni came out. That's where they had the ambulance.
Right.
And so they wheeled me down there, and my wife just sat up above the Zamboni entrance there. That's where her seats were. And she came down, and the team doctor was with me, and he says, "Get in the ambulance." So, I'm getting in the ambulance, and I get in, and he says, "Lie down." And then he says to my wife, "You can come too." So she gets in the ambulance, and so he says, "Lay down." I says, "Well, maybe she should." And he and he says, "No, lay down." So I lay down, and we go down and out the back of the auditorium, and just as we're getting on the road, he taps me on the shoulder and says, "Get up." and my wife laid down while we went to the hospital.
I don't blame her. I'd probably feel the same way, because that was nasty. But I don't recall you missing a lot of games. I think you came back with a mask.
Yeah,
cage.
I had to wear a cage. Yep, I had to wear a cage. Yeah, I did. I didn't. I don't think I missed a game. There was a break at that time, and the reason I remember the break is because the next day, the doctor told my wife that night to come to his office the next day and bring a picture of what my nose used to look like.
Oh.
And so we get there, and he puts like a file up the one side of my nose, and he takes his thumb and he starts pressing the bones, right, to get back to normal, right?
I'm getting the chills just hearing the story, but go ahead. It sounds tough.
And you hear this cracking and crinkling and everything, right?
Oof.
And he stops, and he steps back, and my eyes are watering and stuff, and so he says to my wife, he says, "What do you think?" And of course my wife says, "Just a little more."
Thanks, dear.
yeah, exactly. And so, and we were actually had a few days off, and we had planned to do something with the kids, and one of my daughters came in and says, Diane said, "Well, we're not going to go on the little trip," and she says, "Well, can't Dad stay at home?" So anyways, we went on a trip because I said, "I'm going." Mm-hmm. So we went on a little trip. But, I was fortunate. I didn't miss a game, and it did miss my eye. But the doctor told me there was like 200 stitches inside and out. There's a hole in my nose that he had to sew up with a muscle. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it was bad.
That's for sure. Don, eventually you guys, like I said, you become incredibly consistent throughout this. You're just a lock for 26 goals and a bunch of assists. And the Sabres have a good stretch right through the 70s. Eventually, Scotty Bowman comes on the scene, And I was just curious, we talked before, but everybody has a Gordie Howe story. And everybody kind of has a Scotty Bowman story too. I was curious if you had one that sticks out from your time with the NHL's all-time winningest coach.
Well, Scotty was a dandy. He was very good at matching lines, and he became a great coach. Obviously, he was a great coach, but just that he would get excited, behind the bench,
mm-hmm.
and most of the times a lot of the times it was about the referee, and so he would jump up on, the players' shoulders to yell at the referee and stuff, and I don't know if it's a great story, but anyways, he did that one time. We were in Vancouver, and he jumped up and he was yelling, and of course his teeth came flying out into the bottom of the bench and stuff, and but Scotty, like, he didn't do anything that the only thing he did was like you didn't know whether you were invisible at times or not. Like, most people you walk by, you say hi to and stuff, and they say hi back. And, a lot of times he was in his own world, and he, I don't know if he did it intentionally or unintentionally, but he would just, make, okay, you're not there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I worked with him briefly when I was in Pittsburgh, and I had worked with him previously when he was with Hockey Night in Canada. I'd seen him, and honestly, sometimes I would talk to him, and he was so down to earth, and we had these great discussions, particularly about hockey history and hockey cards and things like that. And then I'd see him the next day. It was like he didn't know me from from anybody.
And when I was with management, he was crazy. He would, I'd go down to the office, and he'd say, okay, we want you to go to Pittsburgh tonight. So I'd drive to the airport, and then I get a call, and he says, no, you're going to Detroit. He would do things like that, and he was, you never knew where he was coming from. Like you say, one day he's your best friend, you'd spend hours with him, the next day you're non-existent.
But it all worked. And I was curious, when you find out that you're getting traded to the LA Kings, you've been in Buffalo, you're part of that community, a lot of memories and a lot of success and a ton of friends. So what was your reaction? Was it something you anticipated, and what was your reaction to being traded out west?
I was upset, especially because it was at that time it was a noon trade deadline, so we had passed the noon trade deadline, but it wasn't noon in LA.
Oh.
So I got the call at 5 to 3.
Oh, you thought you were safe.
Traded. Yeah, exactly. And I was upset. I was really upset because I didn't think it was warranted. I think there was some. They were in a trend. I think they wanted a transition team and to put more of Scotty's stamp on the team, and they wanted to probably go younger and things like that. You look back afterwards and you say, "Oh, okay, well, maybe that's what it was." But I just thought that was kind of disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't very happy about it. But if you got a minute, I got a story about when I was traded to LA.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I was traded with Richard Martin. Rico and I went out to LA, and we're at practice. And first day, George McGuire is the GM, and so after practice, the trainer says, Pete Demers says, you got to go up and see George. Typical thing, you got to go meet the GM, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're walking up there, and Rico says to me, he says, let me do the talking. And just when I'm talking, when I look at you, just nod like you agree. Right? I know something's up, but I don't know what it is, right? So we go up there and we sit, across the desk from George, and George says welcome and all that stuff, and everybody says hi and stuff, and then he asks the question. Rico, I let Rico answer, right? So Rico starts talking, and halfway through he's moving his mouth, but he's not, like, the words aren't coming out. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then he looked at me and I'd nod, right? And George, who I didn't know, he's hitting his ears. And he can't figure out what's going on, right? And so all was like, after I bet you went on for like 7 minutes. And finally I just had to start laughing, right? and because he had 2 hearing aids, right?
Oh.
And so Rico had found this out. I don't know how, but anyway. So and George was great because he just started howling. He started laughing. It was a classic. It was a classic Rico. He's talking and no words are coming out. Nothing. You can't hear. You can hear a pin drop, right? But he's talking away like crazy, and George is banging his head trying to get his hearing aids to work.
And you're trying to keep a straight face throughout the.
Exactly. Exactly.
Don, you mentioned previously the trade to Toronto. You ended your career there. Boy, I got to think back to it. When you just talked about that trade to LA with Rick Barton, boy, it's a shame that he's no longer with us. But that was just a sad time when he was in LA, and obviously was injured, and it had to be a real tough time for him. Had to be a tough time for you as a friend. Just the severe knee injury, and his career ended way too soon.
Yep, absolutely, no question. Yep. Yeah.
When you finally retire last year at the Leafs, I was just curious. Was there a transition process? We talked to a lot of guys, and just curious that first year out of hockey, that out of playing hockey, that first September training camp time. How do you feel? Was that a tough transition moving on to your post career?
Well, no question. It was crazy. Like it was it's almost like I don't know anything else. Like, you've played it all your life, and now in September, when you're used to going to training camp, it's not happening.
Right.
And I think that, looking back, I think I got a little depressed because you missed the camaraderie, the guys. You got 20 guys looking for the same goal, trying to win the Stanley Cup, and they're all fighting for the same thing, and they're your friends. And all of a sudden now you don't have them.
Right.
You're on your own. You're out there in a world that you've have really never experienced to the full extent that you're going to be experiencing it. And it's scary. It's scary because you don't know what you can do or what you can't do, or like there's so many questions that have to be answered, and sometimes you don't know where to look for the answers. And it was a scary time for the first little while. Yeah, it wasn't pleasant for a while. And of course that time, like, I think anybody that they tell you your career's over, that you think, oh no, I can still play. And a lot of times it's yes, you can, because you are smarter than the young guy that's taking your job. Trouble is, you're not as fast as the young guy taking your job anymore.
Right.
And that, you look back and you say, well, maybe the time was right. And I did go and play for the Salt Lake Golden Eagles I left Toronto.
That's right. That's right. I forgot about that.
Player assistant coach there and stuff, and so, that helped because we ended up, we lost in the playoffs and stuff, but it was still a positive experience, and I was I was playing assistant coach, so it was a good experience that way and stuff, and I think that that kind of helped me. I think there might be a glimmer of hope in the hockey industry after I retired.
Absolutely. And that Salt Lake team had a guy I talked to recently, Joe Mullen, who was scoring like crazy down there. I used to read the hockey news, whatever. I'd see his goal totals in Salt Lake and say, when the heck are they going to call this guy up? And obviously, Hall of Fame career ensued from started in Salt Lake City. You, as you noted, you began a career in a long and very successful one, both in the Sabres front office and the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, you've been asked, I'm sure, 2001 times, in addition to the Fog game, about Alexander Mogilny. So I won't go too much into that, but I did want to ask you a question. Back then, people, maybe a little bit younger listening to this, don't quite fully realize how precarious that whole thing was, not only for Alex, but yourself and Jerry Meehan, because back in those days of the Iron Curtain, the KGB was obviously nothing to mess around with. So you go on this incredible journey to secure him in Sweden. But my one question, Don, is, was there a point, well, what was the point where you said to yourself, this is really scary what we're doing here? Like, when this whole thing not only could fall apart, we'd not get the player, but I'm kind of putting myself in a little bit of personal jeopardy here, perhaps. Did you ever have that moment during this whole this whole event?
Episode?
Yeah, I think the key word for it, but adventure.
Yeah. I think, there was a time that the first time, there was two times, I guess. The first time was when he came running out of the mall to jump into our car, and him and his agent came running out, and they yelled that the KGB was right behind them. And so we had to, we had to take off in the car and stuff and got away. And then again, when Jerry was in the embassy getting the paperwork all ready for the defection, Alex, I wanted to talk to his parents, and so we back then there was like kiosks where you go in and like there's 20 booths with phones in them, and you told the person at the desk, gave him the number you wanted to phone, and then they tell you to go in booth number 3, right? And so Alex went in there and he was talking to his parents, and he came out and he said, I've been disconnected, could you reconnect me? And so the lady reconnected him, but this time was like he was there for like 30 seconds, and he came out and he said to me, he says, they know where we are, we got to go. And like, what? How the hell did they know where we are, right? And later I found out that all calls to Russia at that time went to Moscow.
Oh.
And then out to wherever, like, Alex was from Khabarovsk. So it went to Moscow first and then out to Khabarovsk. And they're monitoring it. So they knew that where we were. And obviously Alex thought that they would be there pretty quickly, because he says, we got to go, and we got to go fast. Mm-hmm. Then the heart rate went up quite a bit. Because you don't, like, you hear these stories, like, they didn't fool around. Like, it was like, because the U.S. Embassy had told Jerry right away, he says, our lives are in danger. Mm-hmm. And so, like, when I heard that, and he says, we got to go, and yeah, we got to go. And that's when, really, like, yeah, this could go sideways.
Yeah. It was not for the faint of heart. No,
it was like, yeah, okay, this is like this is unbelievable. You know, and it was great. It was great, but Alex is a great guy.
And you guys were really ahead of your time, taking him in the 5th round and really opening up the floodgates as the Berlin Wall came down and everything changed in the world order. You guys were out ahead of it with Alex, which reminds me of the question I totally forgot to ask you about, but I guess you've been asked that a lot of times. The 12-6 victory over the Soviet Wings was a Sunday afternoon. I remember watching it. That just goes to show you those games were so, because of the Cold War and because of the rivalry between the countries and the international intrigue, that game, the fans loved it. It had to be a lot of fun. You didn't know what to expect, I guess, going into the game. I certainly didn't expect you guys to score 12 goals. What was what's your memory of that exciting day in Sabres history?
Well, it was, you know, like you say, it was, you know, it was the good guys versus the bad guys, and you know, we'd talked about how good the Russians were and everything else, and you know, I think that you know, we just came out with a mindset that, you know, we're going to show them that we're good hockey players, and at that time they sure didn't like the physical play, and they were in a smaller rink. And, you know, like Kong and Shoney were hitting guys left and right, and not dirty. They weren't being, we weren't playing dirty, but we were a lot more physical and stuff. And you know, it was just that we you know, I think partly what happened was that they were in town early, and we had played L.A. at home, like I think 2 days before we played them, and we were god awful. We got beat. I think it was like 9-7 or something. It was just like we were just in outer space. Like we were no good. Like we just probably the worst game we played all year. And they were at that game. Oh. And so they're looking. Oh, these guys got beat by, you know, and stuff. And that was totally not what our team was about, and that might have played into it or not. But I know we later drafted Yuri Himalev, and he was friends. He got, when he was coming up, he got to meet and play some of the games with the guys that played in that game. And he said that they were just petrified of Jerry Korab and Shoney, and you know, they were so physical and strong, and they, you know, they weren't used to that. They were not used to that, and so that that was a memorable game. I got hurt in that game, and a guy took me out with a hip check and a dumb play because we were on a 2-on-1 with Rammer, and I passed the puck to Rammer, and he's going to have a chance to score, and the guy just left him and took my knees out. Oh. So
yeah, I forgot about that.
And then later on we played the Red Army team with Tretiak and beat them 5-1. So, well, that was a great game. Like the 12-6 one, the fans were just like unbelievable. Like it was really, really, you know, quite the game.
Yeah, it was quite an experience as a fan too. I grew up in the Boston area, so I was more of a Bruins fan, of course. But that day, I was definitely a Sabres fan, and that was just a big deal to beat the Soviets at that time, and it was such a relief when you guys dominated the game to such a degree. It was a lot of fun. So, Don, I want to wrap up because you were a thinking man's player, obviously, and you had a great post-career in the game, and your son involved in the highest levels of the game now, and as I said, your grandson playing big-time hockey. I read, I think about a year ago, that you were starting a business that focused on, and forgive me if I'm butchering this, but the psychological, mental preparation for athletes. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that. Yeah.
It's I've always been interested in the mind and the athlete. And it's funny nowadays. 80% of the athletes will say that the game, or almost all the athletes say, is 80% mental.
Mm-hmm.
But yet 99% of the training is physical. So you don't train the mind, and people don't realize that the mind can be trained, and that what we stress to do is that we can take the mental blocks away from a player, and a lot of mental blocks aren't necessarily related to the actual game itself,
Mm-hmm.
but they do inhibit the athlete's ability to perform at its best. And sports psychologists can take you to a certain level. We're way beyond sports psychologists, and our turnaround is almost immediate, and it's lasting. And no one else that we know of does this the way we do it. We get into the player's mind and take away those mental blocks, which unleashes the ability or enhances his ability to perform at its best.
Mm-hmm.
To be more efficient, and to be actually to be able to utilize all his talents. And it's really interesting work. It's called EC Sports Consulting. We're Extraordinary Change, and it's a thing that we can improve the player's ability quicker than most conventional methods that are in play right now, and so it's pretty exciting. And we've worked with many players. We worked with professional golfers. We've worked with Division I hockey players, basketball players, rowers, and we can change their. For example, we can change their process of even having a coach that they don't like, or they don't like because they think the coach doesn't like them, and that affects their performance and how their confidence and everything else. We can change that, and it's the ability to get in and to get into a layer of the player's mind energy, and to change the negative or mental blocks into positive and focused thoughts.
It's very interesting, especially for myself as a father of a young athlete. You touched on a few subjects there that I can relate to be sure. EC Sports Consulting, I'm assuming there's a website?
Yes, there is. Yeah, it's Extraordinary Change Sports Consulting.
Okay. We will, for our listeners, we will link that in the show notes, so you can just hit that and go right to the site. In the meantime, Don, I've been looking forward to this interview for quite a while. I was a big fan of yours as a fan growing up, and it was great to see the outstanding career you had both on and off the ice, and your family as well. So thanks so much for spending time with us on this episode. We greatly appreciate it, and we look forward to staying in contact with you and talking again soon.
That would be great, Mark. I appreciate being on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Don. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast. Be sure to visit us at prohockeyalumni.org.